feel honored to be able to kick this off talking about leadership in academic medicine. There are a lot of great topics that are going to be covered here. And I'm going to try to focus here on academic medicine, but obviously this can apply to other parts as well. But some of these things may be more apropos to academics. So as a disclosure, I work at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I'm currently Chief of Arthroplasty and Joint Reconstruction and Associate Professor at Harvard Medical School. That'll come in with regards to the conversation that we'll have here. These are my disclosures, none of which are directly relevant to this topic here per se. So my initial goal is actually we're going to private practice. I went and got an MBA during my med school years because I was going to be able to run a private practice, and I wasn't interested in academic medicine. When I was a resident, I was one of those. It was one of those things where I got bitten by the research bug. So you do one paper, I joke it's like having a child. I myself have not had a child yet, but if you have a child, you forget the pains of the labor, and then you do another one and you have another one. So the idea is that you publish a paper and you're like, well, that's pretty interesting and good. And then I went and did it again, and I did it again. I also enjoyed teaching as well too. Students, residents, medical students, fellows, undergraduates. So that part of education really came in with academic medicine. So that was something that was important to me. In academic medicine, and to be a leader in academic medicine, in theory, you have to be good at everything. Unfortunately, there's only 24 hours in a day. So you want to have a clinical practice, you want to teach research, there's basic science, and there's clinical research. There's leadership in the local realm, so in your own hospital. There's also leadership in a local realm with regards to orthopedic societies. We have the New England Orthopedic Society here. There's the Eastern Orthopedic Association. There's the Mid-Atlantic one. There's the Western. There's all sorts of local ones when it comes to orthopedic societies. There's national leadership. So they tend to be subspecialty specific, but there's also organizations like AAOS, obviously, which is a national organization in orthopedics. There's international leadership. So there's many, many other organizations outside the United States that do orthopedics. And there's also consulting. And the question is, how do you balance it all? And really in academic medicine, from a promotion standpoint, you need to be good at a lot of these in order to advance, which is tough. So what lessons do I have from academic medicine? So first, find out what you're passionate about. It's really hard to study something or pursue something that you're not actually interested in. So for me, that was periprosthetic joint infection. It happened just by chance. I was an intern and I was asking for a research project, and I was given this paper. And it was called the Pittsburgh Experience with Stage Revision Arthroplasty for Chronic Hip and Knee Prosthetic Infections, a retrospective comparison of outcomes between resistant and sensitive bacteria. First, it's a really long title. Secondly, they said, here's the data, here are the patients, figure out what to do with this. And that's how I got interested in periprosthetic joint infections. I was initially told by someone to not pursue this because if you do pursue infection, then people will come to you, i.e. patients will come to you with infection, and it's a not easy problem to take care of. But the good news is I will always have business because infections, unfortunately, still occur. Lesson 2. Once you find your passion, learn about much about it as possible and practice as much as possible. What does that mean? So I realized that I was interested in periprosthetic joint infection, and that meant two things. One, I'll cover about societies in a little bit. And two, the review process is actually how I really got into academics. It's an unusual pathway. Most people do it from doing research projects or medical education and things like that. But for me, it was a review process. It all started when I was a resident, and one of my attendings came to me and said, will you please review for this journal called Knee Surgery, Sports Traumatology, and Arthroscopy? If you do a good job reviewing this, then there will be other opportunities to do more. And they were completely right. The more I did of it, the more I found interesting of two ways. One, I learned more about the peer review process and how it goes in behind it. And two, how to write better papers myself. So I currently review for 34 different journals. I don't recommend that on a regular basis. I have culled that over time. But over time, I have reviewed over a lot of different ones because you get a really different viewpoint from different journals. What are the other opportunities? So again, my interest is periprosthetic joint infection. So journals like the Journal of Bone and Joint Infection is really useful. I'm an arthroplasty surgeon, so Arthroplasty Today, Journal of Arthroplasty, and then in the broader context of orthopedics, JBJS and CORE. And by doing a lot of reviews, it actually has led me to editorial board positions. And these editorial board positions are important when it comes to becoming a leader in academic medicine. How to research. I could spend forever talking about this, and everyone has different methods of doing so. But when I was a resident, I learned how to do it from scratch. There was no research infrastructure where I was located. So we started off with billing data. Every hospital has billing data because every procedure you do has to be billed. So we had billing data to obtain total joint replacement cases, and we manually extracted data by going through every patient's chart and build a database for subsequent studies. A lot of the things are repeated again: age, sex, BMI, things like, and comorbidities at the time of the index procedure, and you can build on those depending on what you're looking for. When I was a fellow, they had a lot of research infrastructure, and we interfaced with research assistants to complete projects. So it became more of a team effort. So you take care of that, you take care of that. I'll do the proposal, you do this gathering, and you come together as a team. And because of that, and there was a lot of people involved, we were able to perform more prospective randomized controlled trials with support. So it does depend on what you're surrounded with, but you can use whatever you have to be a leader, especially in the research realm. As an attending, one thing you can always do, whether you're in private practice or in academic medicine, is to create your own database and registry. Collect information on all your own cases. You can expand it with your partners if you'd like to, but at worst comes to worst, at least you collect your own patients. I have a spreadsheet with all of my information on it with my patients. I can go back, and I don't have every single detail of information on there, but every case I log it. I log my implants. I log things like the type of anesthesia, location of the hospital, things like that. Leverage any existing infrastructure. So either within orthopedics, so maybe you join a group and the spine division already has a REDCap database that they put their data in. Well, then maybe you need to expand that into foot and ankle, where you're a foot and ankle specialist, or trauma, or things like that. So you can leverage within orthopedics and then outside of orthopedics, right? Most of the time when you join a hospital system, while orthopedics may not be doing a lot of research, other departments might be: general surgery, internal medicine, things like that. So you can leverage those networks. And the one network that's the closest to us is rheumatology, or physical medicine and rehabilitation. So if they have databases of research, there's a lot of crossover with our patients. And you can ask for financial support for research in private or academic practice, or obtain it by participating in studies. What does that mean? So a lot of times, for example, for American Association of Hip and Knee Surgeons, we have multi-center studies, and if you want to participate in it, there can be some funding available. And that funding can go to research coordinators or statistical support. There's also industry-funded studies, and they can also do that. So there's ways that you can build research in your academic setting. Again, industry, they have investigator-initiated studies and multi-center studies, databases you can use. So you have access, for example, to the AJRR, which is the American Joint Replacement Registry. And it's not just for joint replacement, it's being expanded to in a lot of different areas. And because of that, you can put in a proposal to the Research Analytics Institute and come back with the data already analyzed, and you write it up. So if you don't have access to your own database, there are national databases. There are other databases as well, such as Medicare, which is harder to access, and then databases that cost money, such as Pearl Diver. And once you get the database, analyze everything out of it as possible so you can get the maximum out of the database you're paying for. So why do research? It allows you to elucidate findings in orthopedics that can change, support, or refute practice. And presenting your data is beneficial. I learn from other people when they present data. Other people hopefully learn from me as I'm presenting data. And more importantly, if you have data, it gives you a seat at the table. How do you be a leader? You be a leader by being there and being present and being heard. If you have all this information and you're not sharing it with other people, then they don't know that you're a leader in that area. In your own hospital and hospital system, in societies and industry, being vocal actually really helps a lot. Channel your passion to society involvement. For me, that was an easy one because infection, the Musculoskeletal Infection Society, was an easy option to join. So these join your groups that can share your own interests with regards to patient care, education, research, surgical procedures, and hospital leadership. For me, I got to be president of the Musculoskeletal Infection Society, which is surprising at a young age, but I was passionate about it. I had served multiple years in it, and they actually approached me and said, would you like to be president? And I wasn't considering at that time, but I was very thankful for the opportunity, and I learned a lot from doing so. So being president, being dedicated, and most of the time when you look at these societies, if you want to become a leader in that society, a lot of times it's based with dedication and how much interest that you show in it. You can't apply for president of an organization that you've only been a part of for 10 minutes, right? So you really have to show that depth over time and contribute. You don't just join a society and just be a member. Contribute and add to it. It not only enriches your life, it also enriches the society lives and the lives of those around you. Again, don't be limited by your country is something I always think about too. Don't be limited by your geographic location is a better way to put that, I would say. Join societies again and get involved. If you're given a task, do a good job with, right? If someone says, hey, I want you to, build up the membership and make sure to get all the names, email addresses, and contact information for it, and you don't really do a good job of it, then unfortunately you probably won't be asked to do it again. So once you're asked for a task, if you're asking for a task, then do a really good job of it. And you're likely rise in the leadership ranks of that society. Number 4, take opportunities when they arise. When I started academic medicine, I liked the idea of periprosthetic joint infection. That's what I was doing as my passion for research. I still have that as my passion for research, but being at the right time, at right place at the right time can make a difference. For example, robotic total knee and total hip arthroplasty. It's not an area that I would have guessed 10 years ago that I would be doing research in. It initially happened because of a study. One of my senior colleagues was asked to participate in the study and wanted a junior colleague to help out. I happened to be the most junior colleague. I got tapped, and all of a sudden I was doing robotic cases. Now, this is just one example, but it gives opportunities for an additional passion. You can have more than one passion that you're looking into, allows you to conduct research in it, allows for speaking engagement and potentially work with industry, or apply for large grants and things like that, depending on what your topic is. Lesson 5 for me, at least, was to say, do not say no, at least initially. Now my lesson is say no, but that's a whole different realm that I'm sure other people are going to cover in other talks. But saying yes initially opens the door to more opportunities. The hard part is if you say no initially to a lot of things, then a lot of times people won't come back to you to see if you're still interested in doing it. So if you say yes initially and do a good job with it, then that becomes something beneficial for you and can open up more opportunities. That said, you don't always have to say yes. If you say no, be clear to yourself why you're saying no. For example, let's say it's not in your interest or not in your passion, right? It's not a topic that you're actually really interested in. So saying yes will give you some lukewarm response. And if you do so, you may not have a good job of it because you don't love it. If you don't have time for it, right? If you have only so much time for it. And I have a friend and a colleague who says, if it doesn't promote me or doesn't pay me, then I don't want to do it. So money could be something too that could be of interest if that's what you're interested in pursuing at that point. And lesson 6, for me, especially in academic medicine, is network as much as possible. It's all about connections, connections, connections. And you'll see that as med students applying for residency. It's about who you know. It's also what you know and how you perform and things like that, but really who you know. Same thing for fellowship, same thing for jobs. It's who you know that makes a difference. This allows you to do things like get on speaking panels. When you're looking for promotions, they say, well, how many national or regional presentations have you given? These are the podium presentations. It allows you to do research studies. If I see a friend and I become friends with someone, they're like, hey, I'm doing a study on periprosthetic joint infection. We have a small patient population. You have a small patient population. Let's work together. So it can give you opportunities to do multi-center, multi-institutional studies. There are industry opportunities as well too, society and committee involvement, hospital and hospital system involvement, and career advancement. So these connections can really make a difference. I will say, especially for, let's say, my professor promotion. So if we're going for a promotion for any of the levels, they typically ask for outside sources, especially for professor, and you have to be known in the national and international realm. And in order to do so, you have to network as much as possible. So if someone invites you to a meeting, say yes. When you go to the meeting, don't just run in, give your talk, and then run out. Sit down and talk to someone, talk to the panelists, get that feeling, because that, by getting to know the people, one, again, it enriches your life. I've gotten to know people throughout the world, and it's been amazing. To just hear their life experiences and to talk to them and and share our lives as orthopedic surgeons. And it can help from an academic standpoint as well. Time management is the hardest part. There's only 24 hours in a day. And sometimes I'm sure all of you feel like this at multiple times in a day. Either you're drowning in the stuff that you have, and you have 85 different things because there's 85 different ways to reach us. So make sure that you manage your time and prioritize what's really important to you. One way to do so is by looking at your weekly calendar, right? There's 2 ways to look at this. One, from the calendar perspective, is determined by chunks of days. What's your clinical days? So clinic versus OR, and then what's your dedicated research or administrative time? Let's say you're dean of the medical school and you're going to spend a lot more time in administrative tasks as opposed to research tasks. That's going to take time. So you want to protect that early on. If you're starting a new job, you can protect that in negotiations. If you're changing jobs, you can do that as well too. And use your time wisely. And this is the second point I like to say is, for example, turnover time. Let's say you have 30 minutes in between cases. You can grab a bite to eat. You can call the patient's family. You can dictate your note, but that still could leave a good amount of time. So what can you do in 15 to 20 minutes, for example? And I had a friend who would tell me that and be like, okay, I have 20 minutes now, so I can edit the introduction to this paper, for example. Or I have 20 minutes now, I can knock out 5 emails. Or I have 20 minutes now, I can do 2 dictations, something like that. And there's also time between clinic patients. So when you have that chunk of time, fill it with something that you can do in a short period of time to feel productive. So looking at your goals, what are you interested in doing, right? Again, there's only so many hours in a day. If your passion is research, then pursue research. Now, that said, your interest can change over time. I'll cover that in just a moment. What would you be proud of looking back from your life 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years from now? Can you say, I studied that and I'm really proud of what I've done? Or I was a leader in this organization. I'm really proud of what I stood for or what I exemplified. Or I'm really proud of how I taught the students, the residents, the fellows in my group because I did X, Y, and Z. What would you be proud of? And what do you want to look and say, I don't want to regret not doing something? It's also okay for your interest to change. So for example, I still like research. I love doing research, and that's really what I built the beginning part of my career. But over time, I realized I really enjoy the leadership aspect of it. So I've transitioned more from my research to more leadership with regards to that hospital realm. There's benefits to it and there's frustrations to it, as everyone on this call will know. But it's okay for your interest to change over time. And coaching, mentorship, and sponsorship are big things that we can all talk about. It's good to have a coach. It's good to have someone who can help guide you through things and elucidate and open your eyes to certain opportunities. Mentorship is someone who can help you and walk you through things, and sponsorship, people who can promote you in areas that you want to be promoted in. So in conclusion, find your passion and develop your passion. Get involved in societies. That really helps from an academic standpoint. Look at opportunities. Don't say no initially, and definitely network, because that only can help you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. For those of you on the call, you can feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function, and we will read out those questions if you have any. So if you have a question, just put it in the Q&A box now, and we can discuss your questions. While we're waiting for questions to come in, I'll start with a question for you, Dr. Chen. Have there been any books or programs that you've done that have been particularly helpful as you've started to take on more leadership opportunities in terms of your leadership development?
The most helpful thing actually for me was a personality survey that they did at my hospital, which is really neat. It was not the typical like Myers-Briggs one, things like that, but the personality survey was pretty awesome, only because it really broke down how I act under stress. And so it was actually a very neat thing. There's some things I know about my personality and things like that, but that actually really helped me because that can help me see how I work with my other colleagues. In arthroplasty, it tends to be more male. And on top of it, I have a dichotomy of younger and older surgeons. So it's a little bit interesting for, older surgeons to be hearing from a younger surgeon what to do. And from the younger surgeons too, they also think that they know everything right as well. So it was an interesting way to see where my personality is and know exactly how to then combat what my natural tendencies were. So not a book per se, but actually a coach. So a coach is the one that walked me through it. So having a coach was actually something really neat. Our hospital actually gave it to us. A coaching, I didn't have to ask for it. It was nice that they provided this coaching opportunity. So it was really neat.
Awesome. So it's Anna Miller. I don't know if you can, how well you can see us on the camera, but thank you for
Pretty well.
Along kind of that same line of working with colleagues, obviously, in a much more majority male profession. I looked up the definition of the queen bee syndrome the other day. So according to Wikipedia, queen bee, this is women who often take on masculine traits and distance themselves from other women in the workplace in order to succeed. They may also view or treat subordinates more critically if they are female and refuse to help other women rise up the ranks as a form of self-preservation. So my question is, have you experienced that from other women in societies or in your work, or have you seen that happen, and how can we work on improving not having that?
I think the most important thing is acknowledging that it exists. I have experienced that myself. I think the world of arthroplasty has been pretty tough on women. The women who came the generation before me and the generation before that basically had to get through it on their own, and I think that they, again, took on male tendencies. They were tough. And I think the idea or the mentality behind it was, well, I had to work hard to get here, so you have to work hard on your own to get where I am too. So it's not about helping each other or uplift as you climb and things like that that are really nice and are things that I think our generation does a little bit better. And so I definitely experienced that. That said, I was also lucky because there were women in the generation above me who did pull me along. And that was something nice because that became two dichotomous people that I could follow. I could follow one person or one group of individuals where it's like, well, you worked hard, I'll work hard, and then the next generation has to figure it out. And the other group of individuals, mostly the Women Orthopedics Global Outreach (WOGO), is a group of women who traveled to countries and also in the United States to do free knee replacements. And there's a generation of women who are above me who have been nothing but incredibly supportive. And seeing that has shaped who I am. My thought process is, instead of saying, oh, there's only room for one, the answer is there's always room for more. And I think something that I noticed is looking for people running for leadership positions in society specifically, like all AOS, ACUS, things like that. I've seen it before where two women are running for the same position, and a woman would call me and be like, well, we both can't run because only one woman can make it. And I go, well, all the time, men run for the same position. So why can't two women run for the same position, or three women or four women? It just increases the odd of a woman winning. So I think the mentality has to shift. I think it is shifting now. My mentality is definitely there is plenty of room at the podium for lots of different people. And in fact, I'm super excited when other individuals are doing really, really well. So I always say, it's nice because the arthroplasty world is doing a better job of diversifying their panels. But if there's very few women to diversify that panel with, then that same woman is going to talk over and over and over again. And so it was a really great moment. We were at AOS and we had the ACUS board meeting. And at one point in time, I was on a bunch of the pictures, and now I'm in very few of the pictures. And I'm very thankful for that, because Mike Zarsky, our executive director, looked at me and goes like, it's pretty awesome because we have a lot more women to choose from now. So it's pretty encouraging to see that. But that is a mentality that I think our generation is getting more and more of, and moving away from that queen bee mentality of saying, if I'm not the number one, then no one else can be number one. So, but I have experienced that, and I hope that it doesn't happen in the future for our other women.
Agreed. All right, so we have some questions now from the Q&A. The first one is from Carol Lynn. The ability to network seems to be a skill in itself. Totally agree. Are there learning materials you have used or would suggest to help with those of us who have less innate ability?
Networking, by definition, is very difficult, especially if you're an introvert. Now, you'd be surprised to know that I flip back and forth in the Myers-Briggs thing. Sometimes I'm an introvert, and sometimes an extrovert, but mostly I want to go home and be quiet and not talk to anyone. So it is not an innate ability for me. I think what it really comes down to when it comes to networking is trying to find a connection that's genuine, right? So I hate going to someone and be like, so, what car do you drive, right? Like I drive a car and it drives and it goes from point A to point B. And so I don't really care about cars, right? So it's finding a topic that's of interest. So for me, I like Pelotoning. So when it comes to that, I go, so what do you like to do for fun? I like to hike. So if someone says, oh, I really like hiking, or I live in California and these are the 10 trails that were around our house, and that's something that I can genuinely connect with, right? Or if I have a real question, right, for, let's say, an academic question or an orthopedic question, right, I'll say, do you resurface your patellas? And then we can have a genuine conversation about something that's of interest to me. Or, I started using cementless total knee replacements, or I cement my total hips now. What tips and tricks do you have? So connecting with a person on a genuine topic, the easiest way I find that is if someone gives a talk and I find that topic pretty interesting, and I come up with a question, I don't have to go to the podium and ask a question in front of everyone. I can pull them aside afterwards and say, hey, that was a really good talk. I appreciate it. So you compliment them, and that's something beneficial. But you're being genuine about it. You're like, you say, that was a good talk and I have a question about this, or can you clarify this? So all of a sudden you're having a genuine conversation about something. And I think that's the easiest way to network because A, that person remembered to say, hey, look, I remember that person, talking about that. And then two, sometimes you have forced networking. So you're sitting at a dinner and you're sitting next to the person for 2 hours. You got to find something to talk about. And I find that talking about your personal life seems to be the easiest way to go. And so I ask questions. I feel like most people like to talk about what's going on in their lives. So I ask questions. I ask about their family. I ask about their pets. I ask about their kids if they have kids. I ask them where they grew up. And those things are genuine questions because I'm interested in learning about them. And it feels less forced in that network as opposed to being like, being sycophantic or trying to get something or things like that. So those are typical ways that I find to it. And sometimes you just don't relate to someone and it's okay to move on to someone else.
And then if you see them again and you remember their kids, that's a whole nother bonus.
Oh, that's a huge bonus. Like I've had someone come up to me like, how's your dog Lily? And I go, that was pretty good.
Wow.
That was pretty good. You remembered. So that's awesome.
Okay, we have another question. Kathleen Lineweber, I hope I got that right. When going to events or meetings and trying to network and meet people in academics, how do you deal with the dismissal or being overlooked, or men, or I would add women, being blatantly rude?
I have to admit the easiest way to network is through an introduction. So I've had it before where a student will come to me or a resident will come to me and say, hey, I'm really interested in going to this residency or going to this fellowship. So it's always an awkward thing. I'd be like, hey, this is X, Y, and Z. And here he is really, really interested in going to your program. Then it just gets awkward and not fun, right? That said, if it's an introduction for me to someone else that I know, I'd be like, hey, Dr. Blah, 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 this is X, Y, and Z. And this person is, phenomenal X, Y, this, and interested in something. Start the conversation going so that they get to know you. The best way to do it is have someone introduce you because it's true. Both men and women, unfortunately, can be blatantly rude. And there's times like that, sometimes you have a conversation and you try to talk to them and they completely dismiss you. And unfortunately, this happens. One, don't give up and don't get discouraged. Don't think it's you per se. It could be that person's running to another meeting or that person has to go do something else or something else that might be precluding them from being able to talk to you at that time and moment. You can also say to them something like, hey, it seems like you're really busy. Is there another time that we can connect? Or can I send you an email? Or can I do something else? Like for the academy, I was running back and forth to a bunch of different places. So I felt bad because I can only spend a few minutes sometimes talking to someone. Like, reach out to me after the academy. I can spend more time talking at that point in time. So the blatant rudeness may not be on purposely blatantly rude. Now, if they are blatantly rude, then you probably don't want to keep talking to them. That's not someone you necessarily need to get to know. Again, the best way to get, and sometimes people are really nice to some people and really not nice to other people. Other people who know them or interact with them probably know that. So again, that introduction is pretty helpful, but not always a possibility.
Great. Did you have another question, Kate?
Yeah. So I think one thing, especially as someone who's more junior, is like as you're looking forward towards leadership positions, you have to do some degree of self-promotion or talking about yourself and your accomplishments. But I think it's hard to balance that, particularly as a woman in surgery, with like not coming off as cocky or kind of coming off in the wrong way. So how do you balance the need for self-promotion with also trying to like remain humble and like in good spirit?
There's an easy answer and a hard answer. The easier answer is you're surrounded by good people around you who promote you for you without you having to say anything. And in the academic setting, that can be really nice if that's your chair, if it's your coworker, if it's your colleague, people who notice what you're doing without you having to do it. Now, that said, there's ways that can happen without you having to say something. For example, I was hired as director of arthroplasty research here. And so the number of IRBs we had submitted exponentially increased. And I didn't have to say anything, but they could see that, right? So I remember the vice chair of research being like, we actually need to work on this because we need to call the number that are being done, right? So that's something I didn't have to do or reach out to say. Other people noticed it around me. I have to admit, I am not great at self-promotion. And as you said, it's very, very hard for women to self-promote most of the time. So the best way that I would do so, I think the best way to see this is, again, I'll have other people self-promote for you. And then for you, when you self-promote, you can self-promote in a way that is still seen as relatively humble, if that makes sense. So what does that mean? So if you're saying things like, I'm sending a message to my chair and it's my, yearly update, right? Or you can say, hey, look, I've done these 10 things, right? That's part of the yearly update, right? So I'm self-promoting, but I'm not saying this because I just want to brag. It's because you asked me to fill out a survey of the things that I did this last year. So keep a log of it, right? Those are important things. Or what you can do too is kind of I don't hate to say backhand self-promotion, but you go meet with your chair, or you meet with like the vice chair of research, or someone of I guess academic promotions and things like that, and you say, hey, I've done X, Y, and Z. What can I do to improve? Right. So at the same time, you said, I've already done these things, right? I applied for an R01 grant, but it was rejected. That said, what can I do to improve? Right. So you're asking for help because you still do want to improve. We're never perfect and we're never 100%, but you're also showing that you've taken initiative, or you've taken gumption, or, I submitted this IRB and I'm having a hard time getting this approved because X, Y, and Z. Can you, but I've gotten these others approved, but I haven't gotten this one approved. What can you do to help me with that? So by doing so, you're promoting yourself without having to be too self-congratulatory, if that makes sense. But work with your personality. If that feels too much for your personality, then have someone else promote you. That happened, I think it was in the Obama administration, where women would be all in a room together and one woman would say an idea and another woman would echo it, another woman echo it, and keep giving credit back to that first person. Right. So if you can't say it, then you can tell a very trusted colleague of yours, male or female, and say, hey, look, I've done these great things, but I don't feel like, my chair's recognizing it, or I don't feel like my division chief is recognizing it, things like that. Can you say something on my behalf? And that's okay. That way you don't have to say it and you don't feel bad. They say the same thing for salaries as well too, right? They said like, oh, my brother asked me to ask for this amount, or my sister-in-law asked me for this amount, right? It's not coming from you. It's not saying you're the bad person, but someone else said, hey, look, I think I can be worth this amount. Can we please look into that? So using other people to help promote you is not a bad thing. As long as you're promoting for something that's real, right? You don't want to just promote for the sake of promoting, but promoting something that's really good. I think other people should know that. And it's nice to have other people help you with that.
I had a question. I'm Danielle. I'm one of the interns here at LSU. One question I did have was, how do you kind of manage the internal or even external pressures of reaching certain positions by a certain timeline, and how do you kind of deal with whether or not you do achieve those, or not achieving those at the rate that maybe you had envisioned previously?
So the short answer is, this is your life and your choice. I've had it for a woman was told that you had a baby, your baby was in the NICU, you took off 6 months from your academic career. This is academic suicide. You will never recover from that. And the short answer is that was completely untrue. So use your own timeline. I personally didn't have kids early on, and I plan to have kids, hopefully, maybe, in the near future. And so my timeline is going to change, right? I know that I'm not going to be able to continue doing the same exact stuff that I want to do before, but that's my personal choice. Some people choose to have, let's say, kids earlier, or, they want to work on their promotion earlier. There's no set timeline, is the short answer for that. And the best way I would say I would look at that is I look at things like we have the Hip Society and the Knee Society. They're very what we call exclusive societies, member invitation, et cetera, et cetera. I have people who are entering it in their 30s, and there's people entering it in their 60s, right? There's no timeline for one of these things. I think the only tough part when it comes to timelines are things like the ABC Traveling Fellowship, or like the North American Traveling Fellowship. I'm looking at Dr. Miller when I'm saying this because she is the preeminent expert in this topic. So there's some things that have timelines to it. For example, you age out at a certain age, right? So if you're wanting to do something, you might have to do it at a certain time frame. But there's no timeline for a promotion to professor, or associate professor, assistant professor. There's no timeline for getting grants and things like that. There's no timeline actually technically for it. Some things though, like a new investor grant, or a KO8 award and things like that, have to be within the first, I think, like 10 years of practice, right? So there are some things that have caps on it, but very, very few things. So you take care of you is what the most important thing is, right? And that's why I think it's so important to figure out what you're passionate about and what you want to accomplish, and then put that on your list. One, I would say, put in by priority, so that I have to accomplish this. And if I don't accomplish this, I will regret that, right? And there's going to be a bunch of other stuff in there that would be nice to accomplish, but may not actually happen, if that makes sense. But that timeline is yours, and it can be any time frame. So don't feel peer pressured by other people saying, oh, you're waiting too long for this, or, I can't believe you haven't done X, Y, and Z yet. Things happen in life, and it's okay to do that.
So on that note, one of the questions we have from our audience, Rena Jane says, knowing how busy you are, how do you stay grounded? Do you manage to wear all these different, how do you manage to wear all these different hats and maintain sanity?
I should ask Rena that exact same question because she does a million things and is completely sane and incredibly supportive and is truly one of those women who lift up other women in orthopedics, which is phenomenal to see. She is the opposite of a queen bee. She is phenomenal at what she does, but helps other people as well. But staying grounded and staying sane is probably the hardest thing to do, in all honesty. And that's why I say your timeline is your timeline. Don't feel the pressures from external timelines, because if you do, you will only hurt yourself, if that makes sense. So what keeps me grounded? My 4-pound dog, who's 8 years old, and she's wonderful. My significant other, he keeps me grounded, and that helps. Working out keeps me grounded, and don't forget to do things that you need to do. I remember a period of time where I had a bunch of deadlines and I wasn't working out. I wasn't spending time with friends or family, and I was traveling too much, and it just got too much to me. It was too much, right? So you have to know yourself. There was also times in my practice where I was staying till 10 or 11 o'clock at practice and doing cases, or taking call cases and stuff like that. That was also not a good balance, and that's a whole nother word I like to use. But the whole work-life balance is something I think people talk about a lot, but it's not necessarily balance. It's about what keeps you grounded. So I really like that wording for it. So find what's important to you, both academically, both clinically, and as well as your personal life, and do that. And so you realizing that sometimes one thing will have to give, and other things will have to give as well too. So are there weeks that I go without working out? Absolutely. And so that's just part of life. But I feel like for my mental well-being, it seems to help. So being able to work those things in, what I found to do is actually I've started doing more workouts during Zoom calls, turning off my video because that's something you don't want to see. But if I have a 6:30 morning call, I will get on my Peloton and do that, right? Because it makes me feel better, or makes me feel a bit more sane. But that's what works for me. Sometimes for people it's reading a book or watching a movie, or doing nothing. They say mental breaks are really important. So whatever works for you from a grounding perspective, experiment too. Try different things. The other thing for me too, I said hiking. I really like hiking because I'm out in nature and there's no reception, or I'm not looking at my phone. So for that glorious however many hours I'm out hiking, it's phenomenal. And I'm just focused on who I'm with, and then I'm not paying attention to the electronic media that's dinging on my side. So those are things that are important, and just finding out what keeps you grounded is really helpful.
Great. Next question from Haley Fry. What is the best protocol? This is more research oriented. What is the best protocol for getting the most out of a data set without oversampling or fishing the data set?
So the short answer is there's only so much you can get, but at the same time, it's very hard to overfish a data set. The one thing you don't want to do is salami slice, right? You don't want to take the exact same stuff and put it in 2 different ways in 2 different journals, because journals know that, they see it, and that's fraud. You don't want to do that. Now, that said, Dr. Grauer at Yale has probably done the best job at taking a database and literally studying everything physically possible about total joint arthroplasty from it. Huge database, huge information, great data, and looking at things like hyponatremia and looking at kidney function, things like that. And the idea is you want to have a research question, and you want to answer that research question. So as long as you have that, you can use the same data set, and it has to be large enough to encompass that. And more importantly, I would say with the data set too, is that data set is probably going to be dynamic over time. Meaning, you do a study now, you're going to add data for a year from now, right? You're going to keep adding data for it. So it can change. Now, you don't want to say, I'm going to look at trends in total joint arthroplasty from 2010 to 2022, then 2023, then 2024. It's not going to be an impactful study, right? But the idea is you can look at questions that you address. So it's like, I saw a patient with a kidney transplant. Is it better to have a kidney transplant first, or to get dialysis patient and to go total joint replacement? And so even though a question has been asked in literature before, but hasn't been asked in this data set, then it can actually be done. So it is important to look at it. You don't want to overfish. You don't want to salami slice, but it's okay to look at the same data set from pretty different angles.
Another research question from Melanie Valencia. Did you take additional years during your training to focus on research? And if so, when did you take this time? How do you feel it impacted your career path? And how do you justify extending an already long training?
So I didn't, and I kind of wish I did actually. I think the one thing I wish I had done was an MPH, a master's in public health, or at least a biostatistics class. That is my weakness. I know basic stats, I can get through things, but I don't know stats to the deep depth that a lot of our colleagues who really understand statistical analysis or statisticians do. So I didn't personally take any extra time to do research. I did was read a lot of papers and learned a lot of information from that, and watched webinars, and read some papers and things like that that helped give me information about it. It is a long process to add more to it. I'd say the best way to do so, as a resident, you're normally tied to a university. You can audit a class. So that's one way to do so. If there's one area you want to get better at, let's say like how to design clinical trials or something like that. You can do an MPH. In our residency program, people do take off time to do MBAs, MPHs, research year, international experiences, things like that. So you can do that. It does prolong your training, but if you think about it, it's 1 year in your training versus a lifetime. So while it does make it a little bit longer, at the grand scheme of things, if it's something that's going to make you happier and preclude you from having to do it later, like for me right now, if I were to take off some time to do an MPH, I think that would be detrimental. So I think it's easier to do it in training. So if you have the opportunity to do it in training or earlier in practice, then that would be a really nice thing to have if you think that's important. Otherwise, you can take up most of the information through outside learning.
Great. A challenging question for you from Giselle Hernandez. How do you leave a commitment once you're involved in many activities without burning bridges?
So I'm currently in the process of doing that. It's been a long process to get there. There's 2 ways to do so. One, if you're doing less, for example, right? So if I'm involved in some activity and I'm doing less of it, for example, and they notice it. So I've gotten an email once being like, hey, I noticed that you didn't do X, Y, and Z in the timely manner that we thought you previously had. Are you overcommitted? Is this something that you need to think about, taking on less responsibility, et cetera, et cetera? That opened the door for me perfectly, because I said, absolutely, I can't keep doing this. That doesn't always happen. So I said, they're like, you can take more time to think about it. But you can, decide. And I go, I don't need any more time to think about it. I cannot keep doing this. So there was an out for that. So if you have someone who gives you an out, that's one thing. And 2, the other thing is, over the holiday break, I actually wrote down a list of all the different activities that I do. And one by one, I'm going to start removing them, but I give them time. So that's the thing, right? So if I have, let's say, either a leadership position or some sort of position in it, I can be like, okay, I'm going to do this throughout 2024, but I'm not going to do that in 2025. So they can start seeking someone to fill that position, or I can train someone, or it opens up opportunities for other people. So the nice thing is that if I say no to something, that opens up another opportunity for someone else. So it's not a loss in that way. And you frame it that way, right? You say, hey, look, I'm overextended. I can't give you the best of what you need. So you frame it that it's my fault, not your fault, right? Not you're taking up too much of my time. Please don't do that. It's me. I have too many things on my plate. I dedicate as much to it as I wish I could. And I want to be able to give more. You deserve, your organization or whatever it is, deserve more than what I can give. And so because of that, why don't you look for someone else to find this? And I can help you try to find someone if that's what you want, and I can train that person. So you don't burn bridges because you've fulfilled your position, and you also give it some running time. You don't want to be like, well, tomorrow I'm quitting and we're done, right? That is a good way to burn bridges. I guarantee you that, right? And there's some times when you're like, I really want to leave. And they're like, wait, we'll make this a little bit better for you. Can we, take away this responsibility, take it away. It makes it a little bit harder to say no then and to stop and step away from it. But if it's something that you feasibly can do, then say, okay, thank you. I appreciate you listening to me and recognizing that this is too much on my plate. And I will take the step down and, continue, but in a different manner. Or I really appreciate it. This is still too much for me, but I will do whatever in my power so that it continues being the best possible organization or research project or anything that it is, to make it better.
Okay. Do you have another question?
Hi, Dr. Chen. My name is Carson Bailey. I'm another intern here at WashU. Thanks for the talk. I'm wondering, I guess you've progressed in your career, but thinking when you're more junior and you have pressures from senior people, whether you're a resident and more senior residents or starting out on faculty, how do you balance thinking about what's important to you, or if you feel like you need to take time off to do something or do some research with those pressures that you were talking about earlier, where you need to hit a certain timeline? Because you may feel like the people that are more senior than you have control over or can impact your ability to progress if you do differently than what they expect.
That's where an open conversation is really important, right? So sitting down with the senior person that's important to you, whether that be your chief, your chair, your chief resident, your fellow, or something like that, right? And so the key factor there, I think, is really understanding what the expectations are from them and what your expectations are, right? So if they're expecting you to become professor in 2 years, then you're like, we might need to have a conversation, because while that sounds great, I don't know, what are the metrics for it? So I think expectation setting for yourself and for whoever your senior is really important. So let's say you're on rotation, you're an intern, and your senior resident's like, I want you to be doing a total knee replacement all by yourself within 3 months of starting intern year. And you're like, well, that's surprising, because that's what a residency is for, right? So I think setting expectations, while it might be difficult, there's 2 ways you can do that. One, just straight up say, this is what I think should be. 2, the easier one I would say is use metrics. So when I say, use metrics, for example, ACGME has, how many knee arthroscopies you should do by a certain period of time, right? Or how many ACL reconstructions and what competency level you should be at different points in time. And so that can set the expectations. You're like, well, that's really nice that you expect me to write 16 papers by the time I finish intern year. But most interns at whatever institution only do 1 or are on a project, right? So, setting up your goals and setting up your seniors' goals, or, other people's goals ahead of you to try to equilibrate that, I think, is important. And then actually setting up metrics on how to reach those goals. So, in the academic setting, if my chair says to me, I really want you to be, an assistant professor in the first 5 years that you're here, or the first 10 years that you're here, and then you can look at those metrics, right? So let's say your institution says you need to have a minimum of 25 first or last author papers. Well, then how many papers do I want to try to publish per year? And you can break it down by that, so you can make sure that you're hitting your goals. But then also make sure it is your goals as well, too. So, sitting back with them and talking to them and having regular touch points. Sometimes people set up regular meetings. So, in the academic setting, we have yearly meetings with our chair. And I'm sure Dr. Miller has the same thing as well, too. And most other facilities have that. So at that year setting, I can say, hey, look, to my chair, hey, this is what you said I should do, but I didn't reach it because of X, Y, and Z. Can we change our expectations? Right. So having that open dialogue is key. Not everyone's open to an open dialogue. There's no doubt about it. But being able to try to discuss it and meet as many times as possible, and then using data to support what you're doing is really helpful too. It's really hard to fight data, right? If you're saying, well, if my chair is expecting me to publish 30 papers a year, but everyone in the department is publishing 10 papers a year, they're like, well, then we should be all on the same metric, that sort of stuff. So you can use data from other people to help support what you are or not doing, so that your seniors' expectation not too high, if that makes sense.
Another question we have. So this is from your perspective as a woman, what would you say are unique challenges that women face as leaders in academic orthopedics? And what strategies can we employ to support women in leadership roles?
2 things in women in leadership roles, especially in academics, is 1, the percentage of professors is very tiny. So that's one thing that's just been shown over and over in academic medicine, not just orthopedics, but all of medicine itself. So supporting another one of the thing, and then 2, being taken seriously, right? I think that's one of the things where I'll show up in a room and it's either in my clinic and patients are like, are you the one doing the surgery? So you're undermined there. Or you work with, a medical assistant or someone being like, oh, you're going to see Dr. Chen, but she's a woman. Or you're in a boardroom and, men are talking above each other and trying to one-up each other. And you don't want to say something stupid, but you don't want to talk for the sake of saying something. So then you don't speak up. So being a leader, being a female leader, being a woman leader is difficult. Know your strengths and know your weaknesses and work on your weaknesses is what I'd say. So for me, I am Asian, not surprisingly. And culturally, we typically stay pretty quiet. We're told not to talk up. We're supposed to, you know, be quiet, be subservient, and just put your head down and do a really good job. And that's how I was raised. And that's not how being a leader works in this world. But I recognized that was my weakness. So I practiced. I practiced speaking up, you know, in different settings, right? And it was really hard and really weird at first. I watched other people. I observed first. I watched who I thought were good leaders and who I didn't think were great leaders, and I emulated who I thought were good leaders. So that's true for men and women. You know, I've seen some amazing women leaders and some amazing male leaders. And I watched what they did. I watched how they spoke up. I watched how they commanded a room, and I try to emulate them. Everyone will have different styles, and everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. So I found my weaknesses and I helped it up. And then I actually talked to other women who were in good leadership positions, and the ones who are not queen bees, but the ones who are willing to talk to me and say, you know, how did you do it? What did you do? You know, how did you overcome things? How are you so comfortable speaking in front of a huge audience of people? You know, and it's one of those things where I always tell people my first talk was supposed to be 6 minutes to an audience of 30 people, and I did it in 3 minutes because I was talking so fast and I was so nervous that I just got through it. And so I've come a long way. I've actually not undergone any formal training. And so that's the one thing I would say that's pretty helpful as a leader, being a leader, female leader, is getting some training in whatever way that's possible, that's best for you, whether it be speaking, whether it be doing research, whether it be negotiating, whatever it is, having people teach you and coaching you and things like that to be there. And I think the last thing I would say as being a women leader is you need to know that you belong. And I think most of the times you enter a room and you don't feel like you belong. You look around, other people don't look like you, or you don't feel supported or anything like that. But at the end of the day, you belong. You're supposed to be there. So know your place, that you are supposed to be there. You're supposed to be representing whatever you're supposed to be representing, and own it. And you'll make mistakes. I've made tons of mistakes. I still make mistakes. But that said, there's still ways to improve.
Well, I think we're coming up on time. I think that's a great sentiment to end on, that we all belong in these rooms where decisions are being made. Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. It was wonderful having you, and we hope everyone has a great evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much for hosting this, guys. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye.